This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider. My guest today is Regina Carrico. Regina is a paramedic for a fire department from Kentucky. And for the non-US listeners, we are going to explain later what paramedics do. Regina is a childhood sexual abuse survivor and involved with some local advocacy organizations like the Center of Women and Children, which is Louisville's Intimate Partner and Rape Crisis Center, and People Against Trafficking Humans Coalition of Kentucky. Regina, hi and welcome.
Hi! We finally got this to work.
Yes, I'm so glad with it because Regina and I tried making this happen for quite a few months at this stage. And then there was traveling and summer plans, and I think I had to cancel once because we were all sick in the household. We were canceling and moving, and then the technology just didn't want to work with us. So we gave it many, many tries. It's awesome we're here.
Yay!
It makes it feel very, very special, doesn't it?
It doesn't.
Let's start with paramedics.
Okay.
Because I know I was a foreigner in the US and I know it's like, what's a paramedic?
So here in the States, we have a number that if people call 911, they either get police for if, they need help, legal help and things like that. They call the fire department when your house is on fire. But if you're having a medical emergency, they call us. We essentially stabilize you while en route, and then we bring you to the hospital, whether that's lights and sirens or no lights and sirens. Paramedics can do a wide variety of things. It kind of just depends on the area of the country that you're in. But we still have a fair amount. I can put a tube in somebody's throat to help them breathe. I can do IVs. I can give life-saving medications to stop cardiac dysrhythmias, to help your breathing, to stop seizures, to help pain management. That's kind of the general gist of what a paramedic can do. Sometimes we're just a hand to hold and we can answer questions and refer people to other services. That's general gist of what a paramedic is.
You must go through quite a training for this because it really covers a huge, huge array of many different situations and things.
At bare minimum, most paramedic programs are about 1.5 to 2 years, depending on what type of schoolings. There's some programs that you can get a bachelor's in paramedicine or emergency services management or something like that. But yeah, it was 1.5 to 2 years. After that, I had to do hospital clinicals in the emergency department. I had to do a stint in the ICU.
Oh, wow.
I had to be up in the operating room so I could practice my intubations. Mm-hmm. I had a very short stint in L&D to learn how to deliver a baby just in case.
Oh, wow.
And then on top of that, I had to do ambulance ride time. So let's just say for the 2 years that I was working full-time and going to paramedic school, I had a glazed over zombie-eyed look trying to just make it in one piece from place to place.
But it's so amazing. It feels like you have a serious life surviving skill now. It feels like these 2 years were invested into something that's very useful and concrete. It's like you're saving lives.
Yeah. Thinking back on it, it may not be as long as what nurses do or what physicians do, but it still gets the same point across where you're going to school, you're doing clinicals at the same time. You get some of that sleep deprivation to some extent because there are times where, some services are 24 hours on, 48 hours off. Some are working 12 hours and anywhere in between. So you don't know what the next call is going to be. And you don't know how tired you're going to be because you still have your work-life balance and things like that. So
How did you choose to do it?
That's a funny story, actually. I really wanted to be a large animal vet. That's, when I was 5, that's what I wanted to do. And I had my plan based all around that. I get to school and I start working on my bachelor's. I was really struggling with my mental health at this point in time. So honestly, I'm amazed I even graduated with a bachelor's. But because I was getting average grades, they say C's get degrees, but they don't help you get into higher education. So during my junior year, the pre-vet advisors suggested that I work on getting my master's instead of immediately trying to go to vet school if I truly wanted to do that. Well, at the time, it was incredibly soul crushing. I'm like, but this is what I wanted to do. This wasn't in my plan. So while I was in undergrad, we had an emergency response team. And the year that I was there, they had sponsored 10 of us to get our EMT certification, which is the first step before becoming a paramedic. When I graduated and I decided to take time off from going to school to kind of get my mental health put together and like figure out what my next steps were going to be, I'm like, well, I'm going to have to start paying back student loans. And I had already gotten a part-time job at a private ambulance service here in Louisville. So I was just like, well, I guess I'll just do that. 9.5 years later, I'm still in EMS.
It's funny how life sometimes decides for us, doesn't it?
No, it's very odd. Very, very odd.
That's how I did my many things in life. I did my first job. I was like, I'm going to work for, I thought 6 months or a year enough and put aside enough money to pay for my master's. But then I enjoyed this job and I stayed for 4 years. Life sometimes decides.
Delightful.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
But Regina, let's talk about sexual abuse, because this is such an important thing and such an important message. And I really love that people are sending this message out, because we have to raise awareness. I'm saying it as a mom of an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I've been open about my story for a really long time. It started as a very cathartic experience, being able to verbally say it out loud that this had happened to me, and just being able to share it and show that someone is potentially going through this. The Center for Women and Families is our rape crisis and domestic violence center here in Louisville, but it also helps the outer lying counties nearby. So I had gone through their advocacy training to potentially do hospital advocacy, which is if someone goes to the hospital saying that they were sexually assaulted, they have someone just come sit with them. And just give information on the center if they want, like, no cost to them therapy, group helps, referrals to other places and things like that. So it was through them that I first started like publicly sharing my story outside of friends and family. So the story goes, my perpetrator was my dad's dad. Because of how the PTSD and depression and anxiety impact my memory, I can't recall exact ages. These are kind of just rough estimates on like, okay, I was in this grade, so I would have been this age, and some other things. So thankfully, he did not live in the state. He lived in California while I was still in Illinois with my parents. So we would see him every couple of years, or we would go out there. So it happened at ages like 5, 7, 10, 13, and 15. And 15 is when I finally said, no, don't touch me anymore.
How did you decide or know that at 15 that this is not okay? How do you reach that point that's so important as a child where you're like, no, this is not appropriate?
So it was actually at the age of 10. I was in my 6th grade classroom, and they showed a video on what different kinds of abuse was. And my dad was a very different person than he is now. So he had a lot of issues when I was growing up. So I knew about, the verbal and emotional abuse from my dad. But when it got to the sexual abuse part, it was like sitting there as a 10-year-old, just like the color draining out of my face and just like this sinking feeling of, oh my God, this is me. And I decided to keep it a secret.
I'm learning that it's important that schools, that we educate children and inform them about this. So we raise awareness. But did the school also give you some place to go to if you wanted to talk? Or did they just say, this is happening, and if it's happening, it's bad for you? But
that was about it.
Okay. Yeah, that was missing.
The education and awareness is definitely getting a lot better. And it's something that I'm constantly pushing for. Comprehensive sex education is learning at a young age about what your body parts are, what boundaries are, and what consent is. Like understanding that if you don't want somebody to touch you, you can say no, regardless if it's a family member or a stranger.
Yes.
And that's one of those things that I continually push. But we know I went to a Catholic grade school. Like that was not really talked about. I felt like an outsider already going to that school, so I didn't feel comfortable talking to any teachers or any friends. My mom was working a lot, and I didn't want to like burden her is essentially how I felt about it. And I did not have a good relationship with my dad when I was a kid, so there was no one really for me to reach out to until quite a few years later.
So what needs to happen is while you're educating children, you also have to give them some kind of a point of contact where they can
ask
talk.
The uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, exactly. So we were saying you learned about this at the age of 10 and then decided not to talk about it. And then obviously something happened when you were 15. You mentioned 15.
Yes, I started seeing the long-term boyfriend in high school. And when we started to get physical, I started having flashbacks. So eventually I became so overwhelmed with these flashbacks that it just kind of all spilled out at one point. And he responded in probably one of the best ways possible. And he said, I believe you. And what do you need? And obviously at the time, I'm like, I don't know. And he encouraged me and didn't push me to say, okay, well, you need to go talk to somebody. He kind of just went at my pace. And he's like, okay, probably tell your parents. And eventually I told my mom, and her and I decided to not tell my dad because we weren't sure how he was going to react. And at the time I said, I'm just talking with friends about it and like starting to deal with it that way. I don't need to go to therapy. Thinking back, that's something I really wish my mom had pushed was you need to go to therapy. You need to talk about and you need to deal with this, because I didn't start dealing with it till 23. So if you think about it, that's, 17, 18 years of not dealing with it and having those complicated emotions compounded on each other.
But she was supportive. Did she protect you from then on, from your grandfather?
She protected me the best that she could. Obviously, with it being family, it made it really tricky. My dad not knowing that it was his dad that was doing it. She just tried to keep us as separate as possible, but it was still pretty challenging. It was a very messy and ugly situation, as one would expect with something like this. But she tried. She tried.
Before we talk more about her, do we want to talk about your gender identity? Because you are my first they guest.
Sure.
Does this connect to this story, or did this happen before?
I would say it's kind of intertwined with it, because we didn't really have LGBTQIA education when I was growing up. So it's like, late 90s, early 2000s. So it wasn't really talked about in school. Thinking back, I think I've always known that I was gender fluid. I always felt more comfortable in a t-shirt and jeans, and I would be the person that would get absolutely infuriated when people would say, well, you can't do that because you're a girl. And I'm like, who gives a fuck, honestly? Like, what does it matter if I'm a girl? So
does that happen a lot in Kentucky? Because Kentucky is in the South, and now I'm sorry for stereotyping and generalizing.
You're not wrong.
But the South is, and I'm always trying to clear these things for my international listeners, you know, the South of the United States is very conservative and slow towards changes. So it must be, do you feel like, especially there, if you're born as a girl, you're being pushed into pink dresses and, cooking classes?
When I moved to Louisville, it is the blue or the more liberal part of Kentucky. Kentucky is mostly conservative with pockets of little spots here and there. So it's kind of odd, but Louisville is really eclectic. So we have a lot of just miscellaneous groups of people. And Louisville is surprisingly very queer. We have a big population of different organizations, and we have our pride festivals. We're about to get our own LGBTQI center here. If I leave Louisville to the rest of Kentucky, it might be a different story.
Okay.
Like small town Kentucky, kind of have to be concerned about. So yeah, I've kind of always known that I was gender fluid. I just didn't have the language till I got older. And started realizing it. And then it was in college when I realized that I am attracted to people not specific to gender, but to their personality and intelligence, in addition to, physical qualities. Because I had my first girl crush in college and did not realize it was a girl crush until after the fact and went, oh my God, I had a crush on my best friend. But it wasn't until the last few years that I've started to really embrace this. And it's been interesting because my spouse is incredibly supportive. He's a cis hetero dude. So he's one of those just absolutely beautiful partners that just took things in stride. He had difficulties with it, but he's grown just as much as I have in supporting me in whatever way I can. I joke that I'm like, well, I don't know if I really feel like a daughter. Like, I guess I still am. And he's just like, well, wouldn't you be? I thought you were just like daughter plus, your daughter with some flavor. And I'm like,
but
that's a quality description.
Yeah, but you got me when you sent me a sentence that said, I would like to talk about my previous mother-daughter story and now my mother-child relationship. But I love it. We already started talking about mom. So let's introduce mom a little bit. So we know she's from Poland. Her name is Bozena. Tell me about her. Tell me about her life a little bit.
So she was born in 1964. She was the third kid of four, first daughter. Obviously, that was, post World War II. So it was Russia's control in Poland. So there was obviously a lot of restrictions and things like that. She grew up in a small village near Zakopane, which is the southern part of Poland. She grew up on a farm, essentially, went to school and decided she wanted to become a nurse. So she went to nursing school in Poland, got a master's in Poland, which is hilariously only the equivalent of a bachelor's here, which makes zero sense to me. But before her last year of nursing school, she had decided to take a break and travel. So she traveled to a couple of different places, and she also got to travel to the United States. Chicago has, I think the record still holds that it has the second largest population of Polish individuals outside of Warsaw. So she had a second or third cousin, and she just stayed here, made some money, saved some money, and she met my dad while she was here.
Can I just quickly interrupt you? Because Poland back then, as you said, was part of the Eastern Bloc. So it wasn't that easy to leave the country. Do you know how she managed to leave the country to go travel?
Nope.
Okay, so but Mama Bozena did. Good for her.
She did. No, she said that it was very difficult to get visas. I know she talked about how she wanted to go to Austria when she didn't get the visa to go there, but she got the visa to go to Turkey. Don't quite know how that one worked. And then as for the visa for the United States, I think it was just a work visa. She hasn't really told me the exact details of how she managed to score that.
Okay. So now she's traveling the world. She ends up in the US to visit family and meets your dad.
And meets my dad, who is a grocery store clerk, and her English wasn't really good, so I don't know how the initial courtship went. But my parents are two very, very different personalities, so it's just curious to see how that worked. But they dated, and after 6 months, they got engaged and got married. She told my dad that she would have to go back to Poland for a year to finish her schooling. And then after she finished her schooling and got all her degrees, she came back to the States and started getting process here to start working here. So she was taking English as a second language classes. She was getting nursing classes taken care of. She was starting to maintain a household. She was working at a hospital at the same, around this time as well. It's funny. She'll tell me, like, I made like $3 an hour on the hour. And, now she's been in nursing for 30 years now. And it's just so funny to see how she started making so little and now is making so much, because she was the primary breadwinner for the household. So
Mom had a lot on her plate.
Yes, she did.
3 kids, education, learning English, getting a job, working in the hospital, and being the breadwinner.
Thankfully, both my babcia and Javik, my grandma and grandpa, came over and lived in the States for most of my siblings' lives. They would help raise us because my parents were on opposite schedules. So my mom would work in the morning, my dad was on night shift, and they would drop us off at my babcia and Javik's house after school until my mom could come get us from work. So.
Is she still working? What is she doing now? What is she and how is she doing now?
She's still on the same floor. She's an ambulatory infusion nurse, so she gives a lot of chemo. She gives a lot of other infusion drugs. So she's been on with that group for 30 years. They finally upgraded that floor out of the basement.
No, they were sending people for chemo in the basement.
Yeah, for quite a while at that hospital. So
that's terrible. That's terrible.
Right.
That's terrible. Yeah.
You're just like it's already bleak and anyways. But yeah, so they finally got upgraded out of the basement.
Okay, good. Is she still married?
Somehow.
Okay.
I like to joke that my parents have been married out of spite for these many years. They are two very stubborn people who grew up in a time where it's just like you get married and you stay married no matter how it goes. And I'm just like, okay, that's fine, I guess. You two would probably be happier apart, and you've talked multiple times to your children about divorce. You should but she likes to garden, so she does amazing landscaping. She's done a lot of house projects. Her brothers are, contractors, so they've worked around the house and helped her out with that. So she's constantly on the go. She's very much like my babcia. Like, I'm pretty sure they're just going to keep going till they can't anymore.
But let's learn from her. And now I'm curious to find out what you feel are the most important things she taught you.
So the first one is cultural appreciation and curiosity. She expressed from a young age how, she's always wanted to go to Austria and many other countries. She was able to send me on I did choir in college, so we did a singing trip. So we got to go to Austria, Slovenia, Germany, and Czech Republic. So we got to do this little singing tour. And in college, I got to do a study abroad program in Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. Oh, cool. So it's one of those things where I just love going to different places. I love observing different cultures because you can see a lot of similarities with your own, and it's just, you just learn so much from so many people. It just makes you a more robust and makes you appreciate what you have and what you don't have. Mm-hmm. The second thing that she taught me was a love of learning. She always talked about when we were younger how one day she'd like to go back to school and maybe teach nursing and things like that. And that's always carried on with me. She's always encouraged us to go to school and do well in school and learn what you can. She encouraged us to read when we were younger. So I was a very, very avid reader as a kid. And still now I have 2 to 3 books going at once. The only thing I would say is she put a lot of emphasis into like formal education. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of things that you can learn with just doing research on your own and reading through books and just learning through trying and doing different experiences and things like that. So,
but that probably comes from her background in growing up in a communist, regime where you did not learn on your own. You learned what they told you to learn.
And I'm sure that 100% had something to do with it. I would say a lot of the things that she has going on is probably because of that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. She taught me how to be independent. Mm-hmm. She put a lot of emphasis in being financially independent, being able to do things on your own. She told a story how they, when we had got a lot of rain in our house and we had to put in a sub pump in our basement, how she just borrowed a jackhammer and put a giant hole in the floor in the basement so the sub pump could put it in. And I'm just like, this woman who has never done any sort of construction work is just doing this. And she's always been like that. Just like, oh, well, if I don't have anything available to me, then I'm just going to figure out how to do it myself. Like 100% something she would do. And as I said, she was the primary breadwinner for our household. So it doesn't surprise me that she taught us how to be financially well off and things like that. So she always encouraged that. So begrudgingly taught me how to garden. So I got to learn, about growing your own food and things like that. And now I'm trying to garden on my own, but the schedule I have and how busy and how tired I am makes it very difficult to just get out in my tiny little backyard.
You have to put your priorities straight. Tell me, do you have other lessons you've learned, or should we skip into lessons, things you wish she taught you?
That was all I think the more important lessons that she taught me.
What do you wish she taught you?
How to rest. She is one of those individuals that just kept going constantly. And now that she's a lot older, she, talks about how her hips bother her and she doesn't have time to sit and rest. You'll sleep when you're dead type mentality, which I think is just left over from, watching her parents having to hustle and bustle. And the fact that my babcia at 80 something and she's still maintaining the household, taking care of my Javik, that's just, what she grew up with. So the idea of taking a pause and resting and caring for yourself, her extent of it is having a glass of wine at the end of the day. And it's just well, that's great, but there's more to just sitting for a moment. The next thing is how to love my body. Growing up, she was always very critical of her own body. So I had 2 significant knee injuries from sports that I needed surgery. So I have 2 scars on my knees. She actually made a comment that I wouldn't find a husband with those scars on my knees. And I'm just like, why are they looking at my knees? I never understood that. But obviously I had no issues in that department because I did find a husband. But Mama, she would always talk about how, she weighs too much. She didn't like how this looked, or she was concerned about her hair. And then she would be super critical of my appearance and then my sister's appearance and how we dressed. And it made it very difficult to just be in my body when it was already complicated enough being in my body. So it was just compounding on things that I was already having issues with.
Was she critical of your brother's body as well?
I can't really remember. Like, I really just remember her being critical of my sister and I, but now that I think about it, I'm not really sure. I mean, not particularly, at least not in like physical appearance. But he's the only boy and he's the youngest, so.
Yeah.
How to be non-judgmental. She can be pretty judgmental. I have a lot of tattoos now, and I have like a septum piercing, and she was very much one of those that when I was younger, I remember her like pointing people out and be like, well, make sure you don't look like them when you're older. And I literally went out of my way as a rebellious individual to be like, all right, well, I'm now going to cover myself in tattoos. She did a lot of base on appearance and first impressions and didn't really give anybody the chance to like show really how they are as people. It's challenging, but at the same time, she grew up one way, so it's hard to just.
I just wanted to say again, I this is very Eastern European, I think. Also.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
It's being judgmental, having an opinion, and just being like, no, I'm not dealing with these people. Thank you very much. I think. Sounds familiar.
That's been my experience when I meet other fellow Eastern Europeans, especially like individuals my age and older, and I'm just like, yep, that's about part of the course.
Yeah, very black and white, very like yes or no.
And then I think the final thing that I really wish she had taught me is how to talk about your feelings. She is a gaslighter, so she likes to say that she never said things that she did, and she never did things that she did, and it can be very, very challenging when I'm trying to explain something to her and she flips the script and tries to say, well, what about me and my troubles? I had to do all this and this. And I'm like, I'm not taking away from the struggles that you had while I was growing up and all those other things, or the traumas that you've experienced, because there's obviously a lot that she doesn't talk about. And I only know so much, but I am talking about mine. So I need you to hear me. And it's a challenge where it's going to be a coin flip of whether we're going to have a good phone conversation or it's going to be a good phone conversation and then she says one thing and it completely derails the conversation. And now I'm just like, well, okay.
These are beautiful. Thank you. Wow, let's very quickly recap. So we spoke about Mama Bozena, who is originally from Poland, where she grew up and then moved to United States to become a mom, a nurse, a breadwinner, and many other things. And what we've learned from her is about being open to cultural appreciation and cultural curiosity, learning, loving learning. And you mentioned that it's important to not only learn what we learn at school, but also learn by yourself and be curious and research and discover things yourself. Financial and practical independence, and how to garden.
Yes.
And then something you wish she taught you was how to take a break, how to love your body. It's such an important message not to be critical of ourselves, because it's not only not kind to ourselves, but obviously that trickles down to the other generations, if there are some.
Yeah, I think most importantly with the mother-daughter.
Absolutely.
Because I would say, no, I'm not discrediting that, men don't have body dysmorphia and or anything like that, but women are usually more vocal about it, saying, oh, I don't like this, I don't like this, I wish this was this, I wish this was that.
Then we talked about you wished she was not so judgmental, and it's interesting how you said that her being so judgmental pushed you into either direction, into being rebellious against things that she was so judgmental about.
It's kind of funny. Growing up, she provided all the examples of what I did not want to do.
That's also useful, obviously.
Oh yeah.
And another thing you wished she taught you was how to talk about your feelings. And I read from that, especially with her.
Yeah.
Regina, thank you so much for talking to me and sharing all of this with my listeners. It was very, very inspiring.
You're so welcome. I had a lovely conversation.
If you enjoy Thank You Mama and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyoumama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Tider. That's Tajder. This was Thank You Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.